Welcome to the podcast. If you'd like to listen to an ad-free version of this episode and all of our episodes, then search True Crime Today Premium Plus on Apple Podcasts and press subscribe. That's our premium channel where all of our ad-free and advanced episodes live, all in one place. True Crime Today Premium Plus. Search it on Apple Podcasts and press subscribe. Even try it for 3 days free.
You're about to take a deep dive into one of the biggest true crime cases in the universe. Or, at least, on our part of the planet. From the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.
Paul Murdaugh grew up with the world at his feet, a member of one of South Carolina's most powerful and prestigious families. His father, Alex Murdaugh, was a prominent attorney, and his family had held significant legal influence over the Low Country for nearly a century. From the outside, it seemed like Paul was destined for greatness. Privilege, wealth, and connections were all at his fingertips. But beneath the surface, Paul was a young man who refused to take responsibility for his actions, and his reckless behavior would ultimately bring devastation not only to his family, but to everyone around him. From a young age, Paul earned a reputation for being wild, out of control, and entitled. His actions, friends and acquaintances would later recall, suggested that he believed he could get away with anything. Growing up under the Murdaugh name came with certain advantages: money, power, and the safety net that his family's legal empire provided. If Paul ever found himself in trouble, his father, Alex, was always there to clean up the mess. And there were plenty of messes. Throughout his teenage years and into adulthood, Paul's recklessness became increasingly difficult to ignore. He was known for partying hard, drinking heavily, and engaging in dangerous behaviors with little regard for the consequences. Friends described him as someone who thrived on chaos, often instigating fights or acting out just for the thrill of it. Despite his reckless behavior, Paul rarely faced serious repercussions. If he got into legal trouble, his father would step in, using his connections and influence to make problems disappear. It was a pattern that had been established early on, and Paul leaned into it, knowing that his father would always bail him out. But that safety net began to fray after a fateful night in February 2019. Paul, then 19 years old, was at the center of a tragic boating accident that resulted in the death of 19-year-old Mallory Beach. The incident occurred after a night of heavy drinking. Paul, intoxicated and belligerent, insisted on driving his family's boat despite objections from his friends. As they sped through the dark waters of Archer's Creek, Paul lost control, and the boat crashed into a bridge. Mallory Beach was thrown overboard, and her body wasn't found until days later. The accident, which was entirely preventable, sent shockwaves through the community and put the Murdaugh family in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. For Paul, the boat crash was a turning point. He was charged with multiple felonies, including boating under the influence, and faced the very real possibility of prison time. The Murdaugh family, particularly Alex, scrambled to control the fallout. But despite the legal proceedings, Paul didn't seem to grasp the gravity of the situation. Friends would later say that Paul never showed remorse for what happened that night, and he continued to party and drink as if nothing had changed. In fact, Paul's behavior grew even more erratic after the crash. It was as though the accident, which claimed a young woman's life and left his friends devastated, hadn't shaken him at all. Paul's arrogance and refusal to accept responsibility after the boat crash put him at odds with many people in his life, including his own father. Alex, who had spent years cleaning up Paul's messes, was now facing a situation that couldn't be easily swept under the rug. The boat crash had brought media scrutiny and public outrage, and Paul's cavalier attitude only made things worse. Alex, already dealing with mounting financial troubles and a law firm teetering on the edge of collapse, found himself under immense pressure. Friends of the family noted that Alex and Paul's relationship, once close, had grown increasingly strained in the months leading up to the murders. For Alex, Paul had become a thorn in his side, a constant source of trouble and a reminder of the legal and financial battles that were closing in on him. The boat crash had exposed cracks in the Murdaugh family's carefully cultivated image, and Paul, with his reckless disregard for anyone but himself, had become a liability. In the months after the crash, Alex's legal and financial troubles began to spiral out of control. He was accused of embezzling millions from his law firm, his finances were in shambles, and his reputation was tarnished. The pressure was mounting, and Paul, who continued to act out, was only adding fuel to the fire. Adding to the tension was the growing rift between Alex and his wife, Maggie. Their marriage, by many accounts, had been rocky for years, but things had taken a darker turn after the boat crash. Maggie, who had always been protective of Paul, found herself increasingly isolated from her husband. She spent more and more time at the family's beach house on Edisto Island, away from Alex and the growing chaos at Moselle, the family's sprawling estate. There were whispers that Maggie had been contemplating divorce, and that she had even spoken to a lawyer about ending her marriage to Alex. The possibility of divorce would have been catastrophic for Alex, who was already teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Could the boat crash and the strain it placed on the Murdaugh family have been a motive for murder? It's a question that has loomed large since the deaths of Maggie and Paul. Theories have swirled that Alex, desperate to control the growing fallout from Paul's actions and facing the possibility of losing everything, may have seen his wife and son as obstacles in his path. Maggie, who was reportedly ready to leave him, and Paul, whose reckless behavior had already cost the family dearly, could have been seen as threats to Alex's survival. Paul, for all his privileges, was a young man who never seemed to understand the consequences of his actions. His life was defined by chaos, and he had spent years creating problems that his father had to fix. But in the end, those problems may have become too big for even Alex Murdaugh to handle. Paul's involvement in the boat crash had shattered the Murdaugh family's image, and his refusal to take responsibility for what happened only added to the strain. In the months leading up to his death, Paul was at the center of a legal storm that threatened to destroy everything his father had built. Alex, already facing financial ruin and the potential collapse of his law firm, was now dealing with a son who was on the verge of being convicted in a high-profile case. Paul's actions had drawn unwanted attention to the Murdaugh family, and Alex, for all his legal expertise, couldn't control the narrative. The pressure was mounting, and it seemed that the walls were closing in on Alex from all sides. Maggie, too, had become a source of tension for Alex. The couple's marriage had been strained for years, but the events surrounding Paul's legal troubles seemed to push things to the breaking point. Maggie, who had always been fiercely protective of her sons, was now reportedly preparing to leave Alex. Her decision to spend more time at the family's beach house was seen by many as a sign that she was ready to move on. And there were whispers that she had been consulting with a divorce attorney. For Alex, who was already dealing with financial ruin and legal troubles, the prospect of losing Maggie and the potential fallout from a divorce would have been devastating. The murders of Maggie and Paul on June 7, 2021, shocked the Low Country and left the nation asking one question: why? Why would someone kill a mother and her son in such a brutal and senseless manner? Theories abound, but one that has gained traction is the idea that Paul's actions and the chaos he brought into the Murdaugh family's life may have been a key factor. Paul had become a liability for Alex, a son whose reckless behavior had already cost the family dearly and whose legal troubles were only getting worse. Maggie, who had been ready to leave Alex, may have been seen as another obstacle in his path. If she had filed for divorce, it could have spelled financial ruin for Alex, who was already struggling to keep his head above water. In a twisted and desperate bid to control the situation, could Alex have seen murder as his only way out? It's a question that remains at the center of the investigation. Paul Murdaugh, for all his privilege and power, never seemed to grasp the consequences of his actions. He was a young man who lived a life of chaos, creating problems that others, mainly his father, were left to clean up. But in the end, those problems may have become too big for even Alex Murdaugh to fix. Paul's involvement in the boat crash had set off a chain of events that would ultimately lead to his own tragic death, along with the death of his mother. For the people of the Low Country, the deaths of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh remain a mystery, a tragedy that has left more questions than answers. But one thing is clear: Paul's actions and his refusal to take responsibility for them played a significant role in the events that unfolded. His life of privilege and chaos came to a brutal and senseless end, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake.
In a world where the darkest secrets lie just beneath the surface.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence says otherwise.
Where hidden killers roam, unnoticed, in the shadows.
I think you would definitely be looking at a blend of toxic, very bad narcissistic personality traits, and they will be vengeful and possibly resort to violence.
Join Tony Bruschi as he uncovers the truth behind the most chilling cases.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence clearly says otherwise.
Each episode, we dig deep into the minds of those who commit the unthinkable.
To your point on narcissism, he thinks in his own mind how witty he is.
Yeah.
But he lost that jury. I was done with him in 2 minutes.
From unsolved mysteries to infamous crimes.
Geez, you've just talked about how you taught yourself how to do everything under the sun. I bet you did a YouTube video, how to best kill somebody with a knife.
Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi takes you where few dare to go.
How does someone with such a dark secret go unnoticed for so long?
With multiple new episodes every single day.
We're not just telling stories, we're seeking justice.
Listen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.